This is Dr. Michael Laney, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, doing this reading today. The topic is the philosophy of mind. In Stephen Mumford's Metaphysics, a very short introduction, published by Oxford University Press, What is a Person? Chapter 7. Chapter 7, What is a Person? Some of the examples of particulars in Chapter 1 were things like tables and chairs, period. They are lifeless and inanimate, period. Some particulars, on the other hand, are animals, such as cats and dogs, period. But people are also particulars, and it is arguable that there is something special about them, period. People matter so much to us, period. Are there metaphysical grounds for their special status? Question mark. They have minds and some think, souls or spirits, period. When that counts for a person to persist through time could be different from what it is for a purely physical object such as a table to persist, period. By a person, I don't necessarily mean a human being, period. All persons that I know probably are human beings, but there seems at least the conceptual possibility of a non-human person, period. The philosopher John Locke saw this in Essay Concerning Human Understanding, published in 1690, noting that any properly intelligent animal could in principle qualify as a person, period, and on the other hand, a human being might in principle not qualify as a person, period. The latter would be controversial because removing the status of a person from a human seems one of the worst things that we could do to them, period. Nevertheless, it has been wondered whether humans in persistent vegetative states still count as persons, period. What would qualify something as a person, then? Question mark. Locke mentions intelligence, and more generally, we might think that a person is a thinking thing, capable of consciousness, an experiencer of thoughts and sensations, period. They might have memory, beliefs, hopes, and emotions, period. Persons are also able to perform actions, and this makes them moral agents, responsible for what they do, period. If an animal was capable of any of these things, or even if a computer was, then we might think them worthy of the status of a person, period. Next paragraph. Thanks for the memories. Because this seems to be what makes something a person, there is a very important implication which Locke saw, period. While we think that a table persists through time in virtue of having the same physical parts, we do not think this true of persons, period. There are some difficult issues here, period. As we saw in Chapter 4, a substance can indeed survive a change in some of its parts, period. When you replace the spark plugs in your car engine, it remains the same car, period. And in the case of organisms, we know that the body is constantly renewing itself, shedding old dead skin and replacing it with new matter, period. But in these cases, it is still physical features that we use to identify a thing and re-identify it over time, period. Locke thought that in the case of persons, it has memory or psychological continuity. That was key to a person's survival, period. Given that my body has probably renewed itself a number of times since I was a naughty school child, what it is that makes me the same person as that naughty school child is that I remember being him, period. Next paragraph. We have no need to restrict our psychology to memory, however, period. After all, I've forgotten most of the things that I've done, period. But I share some of the same beliefs as that school child, some of the same hopes, and some of the same psychological foibles and insecurities, period. Not everything is the same, period. That child thought Father Christmas existed, whereas I don't, period. But such changes between him and me happened gradually, a bit at a time, which means there was some continuity through the changes, period. It seems we have to allow this kind of flexibility into the account, period. Next paragraph. The following is a possibility, period. I don't remember being the same small child who ran home from school one day, parentheses, though my mother has told me the story often enough, close parentheses, period. But I do remember being the person who graduated with honors from Huddersfield Polytechnic. So on Locke's account, I am identical with him, period. But the problem is, I'm supposing that the young man who graduated did at that time remember being the child who ran home from school, period. So the young graduate is identical with the small child, whereas, because I don't remember running home from school, am not, period. Yet I'm identical with the graduate, period. Memory fades over time, so we need to allow gradual change and continuity, period. Wittgenstein gave us a nice image to think of here. The individual strands that constitute a rope go only so far through it, period. There is no single strand that goes from one end to the other, period. But through a series of overlapping parts, the rope manages to stretch from one end to another, period. Our psychological continuity must be like this, period. Next paragraph. The idea that it is our minds that makes us what we are has tempted us, some of us, to even stronger claim, period. Descartes thought that there were two parts to us, our bodies and our minds, parentheses, Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641, close parentheses, period. And it was the mind that was really vital to us, period. We are essentially thinking things, period. For a time, we are embodied in a mortal organism, but thought Descartes it was possible for us to survive the death of our bodies, period. Our minds could live on after death as immortal souls, period. This is a strongly metaphysical claim, yet perhaps a common one, certainly among those who are religious, period. Along with a belief in existence of God, perhaps it is one of the most common of all metaphysical beliefs, which shows that more of us are metaphysicians than we think, period. Next paragraph. Philosophers are always liable to spoil a good party, however, period. They cast their skeptical and quizzical gaze upon many a comfortable belief, period. There are at least two worries they try to give to those who believe in souls, period. The first is what would count as a spiritual substance, period. The second is how such a spiritual substance could interact with a physical one, as it is supposed to happen when mind and body are united during the regular period of one's life, period. New paragraph. Descartes thought that in the essence of matter, he used the term body was extension, period. The idea is that material things, physical portions of matter, are extended in space, period. They have dimensions, height, length, and breadth, period. One could also add that they have a location in space, too, though perhaps this is only relative to other objects, period. Extension isn't enough, however, period. Descartes seemed to be wrong here because a volume of empty space could have an extension, period. There is an empty area in the middle of my room, for instance, that is a metered cube, period. It is extended, but it is not a physical thing, period. What we need is that the extended area of space is occupied, period. But occupied by what? Question mark. A physical thing? Question mark. That would be to go in a circle, period. We are trying to say that a physical thing is. We are trying to say what a physical thing is, period. A notion of impenetrability has been suggested, or solidity, period. The essence of matter is to be extended and impenetrable, period. Presumably, we have to complicate the story a lot for gases and liquids, which are physical things, but not solid as we usually think of it. But let us go with the basic idea, period. New paragraph. A spiritual substance, in contrast, is not extended in space, located, or impenetrable, period. Those are all physical attributes. A spiritual substance is not supposed to be in space at all, though some think of it as in time, period. Ghosts are sometimes depicted in movies as semi-transparent, suggesting that they are not really material, period, and they can pass through walls, so they are not impenetrable, period. Should they even be depicted as being at a place? Question mark. New paragraph. For Descartes, the essence of mind was thought, period. One's mind is a thinking thing, and it is this thinking thing that is supposed to be able to live on, disembodied, period. Now, thoughts also seem to require no spatial attributes, which is what allows us to conceive of them without a body, period. Suppose you think that today is Tuesday and you also desire to own a Salvador Dali original painting, period. Is your desire to own a Dali to the left or to the right of your belief that it is Tuesday? Question mark. Arguably, there is no sensible answer because beliefs are not characterized by a location, period. New paragraph. Whether we live in a world that contains the mental and physical as distinct kinds of substance is thus one question, and an exemplary metaphysical one, period. Such a dualism, italicized, is challenged by the view that we can explain everything in terms of just one type of substance, period. Materialists think that all mental things are reducible to material things, period. Idealists think that all material things can be reducible to mental things, period. Everything about the one can be explained in terms of the other on these views, period. But suppose one maintains that there are both, the material and the immaterial, period. Then we would have a further problem of how the two interact, period. New paragraph. When the spirit moves you. It seems clear as physical embodied thinking things that mind and body interact casually, period. The decisions you make in your mind affect what your body does and how it behaves, period. A decision to run for the bus makes your legs move, period. Recollection of an embarrassing incident makes you blush, period. And what happens to your body affects you mentally, period. If your body is injured, you feel pain, period. If your body is tired, your thinking becomes difficult and unreliable, period. And physical stimuli to your bodily senses causes you to perceive, period. According to the dualist, all our thoughts, sensations, and perceptions are within the sphere of the mental, period. A dualist doesn't have to accept that mind and body interact, but they have some explaining to do if they deny it, period. Next paragraph. The difficult question a dualist would have to face, therefore, is if mind and body are such distinct kinds of things, how are they able to affect each other? Question mark. The descriptions of the mental and the physical given above suggest that there are of such different natures that causation between them looks out of the question, period. When a physical thing causes another physical thing, such as a kick causing a ball to move, one thing presses into another, period. There is a movement or momentum transferred from the kick to the ball, period. We think of causation as a physical process, period. But mental or spiritual things do not have location in space, nor extension, nor solidity, period. So how could a movement of something solid affect them? Question mark. Where would such a transaction go on? Question mark. What would there be to stop the physical movement going straight through the mental substance, such like those movie Ghost? Question mark. New paragraph. This is the problem of mind-body interaction, and it is such a difficult one that some dualists have been prepared to say that, contrary to appearance, the mind and the body do not interact, after all, period. Another response would be to say that we need a different concept of causation to explain the interaction, period. If we restrict the concept of causation to physical causation, then of course it won't apply to spiritual substances, period. New paragraph. There are nevertheless some who have thought this problem insurmountable, period. I mentioned that one view is to explain all mental things in terms of the physical, period. Perhaps the mind is nothing more than brain processes, period. This need not be an all-out reduction of the mental to the physical, claiming that pain, for instance, is just a certain type of brain process, or that the belief that today is Tuesday is a certain pattern of neural firings, period. It is unlikely that the complexities of the mind can be accounted for in any terms of simple types of physical events such like these, period. But the physicalist will say that ultimately such kind of explanation exists for the mind, even if the details would be staggeringly complex, period. Here we might recall the issues discussed in Chapter 3, period. Is consciousness just the product of physical parts arranged in the right way, or is there something else about it, something emergent, ? New paragraph. Rather than run that same discussion again, there is something more about persons that needs to be discussed, period. To qualify as a person, according to Locke, it was suggested that one needs a sufficiently sophisticated mental life capable of experiencing sensations, thinking, and acting, period. Whether this is ultimately explicable physically is not the concern, period. But we should consider again the view that what makes someone the same person now as the person they were in the past is psychological continuity. The problem is the one we encounter in Chapter 1 concerning numerical identity. In this case, it is what makes a person at one time the very same person at a later time. Next paragraph. 2 into 1 won't go. Psychological continuity is a fine idea, but it has a problem, that it is not necessarily a one-to-one relation, whereas we think that identity, including personal identity, is, period. By this, we mean that a person in the year 2012 can be identical with, at most, one person in 2002, parentheses, if they had been born by then, close parentheses, period. Similarly, the 2012 person can be identical with, at most, one person in 2022, parentheses, assuming they live until then, close parentheses, period. For any person at any time, there will be at most one person with whom they are identical at any other time, period. Next paragraph. However, we see that a person at a certain time could have psychological continuity with a number of people at other times, period. How so? ? Here's an example, period. In an old 1960s episode of the original television program Star Trek, The Enemy Within, close quote, open quote, Captain Kirk gets split in two due to a transporter mechanism failure, period. Both the quote-unquote new, close quote, Kirks that emerge can remember graduating from Starfleet Academy, period. They both recall their request for Scotty to beam them up, period. Somehow, the transporter duplicated Kirk in every detail, both bodily and psychologically, period. This is, of course, the stuff of science fiction, but it seems a logical possibility, period. All that matters for philosophers is that it could be true, period. In the Star Trek story, the two Kirks are actually a bit different, period. One gets all the badness and aggression, and the other gets all the niceness and indecision, period. But they are equally close to the original Kirk, and we could imagine a case where the two new Kirks are the same. towards the end of the episode, the two have a fight and argue. I'm Kirk. No, I'm Kirk. And that sort of thing. Period. New paragraph. This puts the psychological account of personal identity in some difficulty, period. It seems that neither new Kirk is identical to the old one because they are two of them and only one of him, period. Identity is one to one, period. And yet, suppose after the first one had come back as before, Scotty had seen that the malfunctioning transporter was in the process of creating another period. Realizing that having two Kirks would mean the original Kirk effectively ceased to be, Scotty decides to destroy Kirk number 2 before the process of assembling him is complete, period. New paragraph. If this second story, it seems that, on this second story, it seems that the post-transporter Kirk is identical with the original Kirk, period. He has adequate psychological continuity with the original, and there is only one of him, period. He has no one else to contest with him the identity of Kirk, period. And yet, why should it matter so much whether some other person is around or not, ? Might we think that identity should be a matter intrinsic to the individual or individuals concerned, ? Should it really depend on whether someone else exists, ? I'm pretty sure I'm identical with the young man who graduated, period. Yet I cannot rule out the possibility that last night my bedroom was invaded by a mad scientist with a full brain and body scanner that created a duplicate of me elsewhere this morning, period. Given that, I do not know for sure whether such a duplicate is being kept elsewhere, then I cannot know for sure whether I really am identical with the Huddersfield graduate of 1989, period. All in the mind. New paragraph. So far, I have been willing to run with the idea that psychological continuity is the key thing, following Locke's original idea, period. But can we really trust in that account? ? If the mad scientist goes and creates a duplicate of you, can't you still claim to be the original, even if the duplicate has replicated your mind entirely? ? And here's how you could argue it, period. You are the real you because you are the original organism, period. As well as psychological continuity with the original, you can also point to bodily continuity, period. You woke up in the same bed you went to sleep in last night, and you did not leave it in between, period. There was a continuous line in space, in time, and between you now and what was throughout the past, period. There is no such line with the imposter, period. He was created in a shabby laboratory on the other side of town, more than 5 miles from where you lay, period. The poor soul may think he's you, but he's not you. Pity him or her, period. New paragraph. Here is another consideration in favor of this view, period. Suppose an American historian reads everything there is on John F. Kennedy, period. Perhaps he becomes the world's leading expert, period. But he works so hard at his academic career that he suffers a complete mental breakdown, period. He starts to believe that he is President J.F. Kennedy and that he's only just woken up after a coma that began in November 1963, period. Because he knows so much about Kennedy's life, he can tell you all about everything he has done, period. He tells you it all from a first-person perspective, period. In his delusion, he remembers being president during the Bay of Pigs calamity and the Cuban Missile Crisis, period. New paragraph. This shows that Locke's memory criteria of personal identity is inadequate, period. We can distinguish between true and false memories when the false ones are in some way illusory, period. There are some cases where people hear stories so many times they start to believe that they witnessed them firsthand when they didn't, period. Purported memory is not enough, period. New paragraph. Assuming then that first-person testimony is not enough to make a memory real, or perhaps not enough for it to count as a memory, or as opposed to only a pseudo-memory, there must be some other basis on which we distinguish real and illusionary memories, period. And what better a criteria than the physical continuity in space and time of the body, question mark. Our historian is not Kennedy, because he has no bodily continuity with Kennedy, period. Kennedy's body still lies in Arlington Cemetery, Virginia, period. The historian has never even been to Arlington, period. Indeed, while Kennedy was being killed in Dallas, our historian was a young boy in New York, and so on, period. Next paragraph. If we think of a bodily criterion of personal identity, it can release us from some of the problem cases that we have been raising, period. But not all of them, period. In the Star Trek teleportation case, the two Kirks might have equal claim to physical as well as mental, psychological continuity with the original Kirk, period. It seems in principle possible that a person in split, amoeba-like body and soul, period. Maybe we just have to admit that in such cases identity is lost, period. Next paragraph. What then is a person, question mark? Your answer will depend first on whether you think we are souls or not, period. If we are inextricably tied to a body, then psychological and physical factors seem crucial to what makes us what we are, both at a time and also over time, period. But such continuity might not be enough in every case to determine personal identity, period. The end of this reading.